The fluorescent lights of Atlanta International Airport cast a harsh glow across the terminal as Staff Sergeant Jonathan Miller adjusted the strap of his standard-issue backpack. His military fatigues, neat and pressed despite the long journey, stood out among the sea of casual travelers in their comfortable clothes and bright vacation wear. The clock on the wall showed 6:45 p.m., and Jonathan couldn't help but smile thinking about finally heading home. 3 tours in Afghanistan had changed him in ways he couldn't quite explain to anyone who hadn't been there. His leg gave a familiar twinge as he shifted his weight, a reminder of the mission that had earned him both a Purple Heart and an early ticket home. Walking through the airport was like moving through a dream. The smell of coffee from busy cafes mixed with the sounds of rolling suitcases and muffled announcements over the speakers. Everything felt somehow both familiar and strange after so much time away. Children pointed at his uniform as they passed, and several people nodded respectfully in his direction. Jonathan stopped at a small shop, purchasing a bottle of water and exchanging pleasant small talk with the elderly cashier, who reminded him of his grandmother. She refused to accept his money, insisting it was on the house for a serviceman. It was a small gesture that touched him deeply, though he managed to slip a $5 bill into the tip jar when she wasn't looking. As he made his way to his gate, B-23, Jonathan couldn't help but think about his family waiting at home. His mother didn't know he was coming back today. He wanted it to be a surprise. He could already picture her face, imagine the tears of joy that would fall when he walked through the door of their small house in Augusta. His younger sister had just started college, and he was carrying a small gift for her in his backpack, a delicate bracelet made by a local craftsman in Afghanistan. The economy ticket in his pocket felt like it was burning a hole. The military travel office had done their best, but with so many soldiers returning home, options had been limited. His injured leg, while healing well, still ached after standing too long, a souvenir from a mission he tried not to think about too often. The doctor at the base had suggested elevating it during long flights, something that would be much easier in first class. Reaching his gate, Jonathan noticed it was already crowded with passengers preparing for the evening flight to Augusta Regional Airport. The air conditioning hummed overhead, fighting against the Georgia heat that seemed to seep in through the large windows. Outside, planes taxied across the tarmac in the fading daylight, their lights blinking steadily against the darkening sky. He found a seat near the gate desk, setting his backpack down carefully. The gate agent, a young woman with a kind smile and a name tag reading Sarah, was efficiently working through a line of passengers with various questions and requests. Jonathan watched as she handled each person with patience and professionalism, even when faced with complaints about the weather delays affecting other flights. Checking his phone one last time before the flight, Jonathan smiled at a text from his best friend back in his unit. "Don't forget your promise to call when you land, brother." The camaraderie of his fellow soldiers was something civilians often struggle to understand. It was more than friendship. It was family forged in the most challenging circumstances imaginable. As the minutes ticked by and boarding time approached, Jonathan gathered his courage to approach the desk. Maybe, just maybe, there would be a chance for an upgrade. His leg was starting to throb, and the thought of 6 hours in a cramped economy seat was becoming increasingly daunting. Little did he know that his simple request was about to spark a chain of events that would change not only his journey home, but the lives of several people around him. Sarah, the gate agent, looked up with a warm smile as Jonathan approached her desk. Her fingers paused over the keyboard as she noticed his slight limp and the military fatigues. The overhead screens displayed the flight details. Delta 2478 to Augusta Regional Airport. Scheduled departure in 45 minutes. "Good evening, Staff Sergeant," she greeted him, reading his rank correctly. "How may I help you today?" Her voice carried the practiced pleasantness of someone who had mastered the art of customer service, but there was genuine warmth in her eyes. Jonathan cleared his throat softly. "Good evening, ma'am. I was wondering if there might be any possibility of an upgrade to first class. I recently injured my leg during service, and the doctor recommended keeping it elevated during long flights." He spoke quietly, clearly uncomfortable asking for special treatment. Sarah began typing, her expression hopeful. "Let me check what we have available. We do try to accommodate military personnel when possible, especially with service-related needs." She clicked through several screens, her face brightening. "It looks like we have one first-class seat still available. I should be able to." "Excuse me." A sharp voice cut through their conversation. "I couldn't help but overhear, and I need to interrupt." A woman in her mid-40s stepped forward, wearing a designer business suit and carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than Jonathan's monthly salary. Her name would later be known as Rebecca Thompson, though at that moment, she was just another face in the crowded airport. Rebecca strode to the desk, positioning herself next to Jonathan. Her heels clicked authoritatively on the airport's tile floor. "I've been waiting for an upgrade all day. I'm a Platinum Elite member with over 100,000 miles this year alone." She pulled out her frequent flyer card, placing it firmly on the counter. "I've earned that seat." Several nearby passengers looked up from their phones and tablets, drawn by the confrontation developing at the gate desk. Sarah's professional smile remained fixed, but her fingers hesitated over the keyboard. The situation was quickly becoming delicate. "Ma'am," Sarah began diplomatically, "we do have certain protocols for military personnel, especially those with service-related injuries." "Protocols?" Rebecca's voice rose slightly. "I spend thousands of dollars with this airline every month. I've been a loyal customer for 15 years. Why should my status be overlooked for someone who bought a basic economy ticket?" She glanced dismissively at Jonathan's simple backpack. Jonathan started to step back, raising his hand slightly. "It's not a problem, really. I don't want to cause any trouble. The economy seat will be fine." His voice remained steady and polite, despite the woman's growing hostility. Other passengers in the gate area began whispering among themselves. An elderly man shook his head disapprovingly at Rebecca's behavior. A young mother pulled her curious children closer, using the moment to whisper something to them about respect and kindness. "This isn't about causing trouble," Rebecca continued, her words crisp and pointed. "This is about fairness. I work hard for my status. Military personnel already get special treatment everywhere they go. Where does it end?" Sarah looked increasingly uncomfortable, torn between company policy, customer status, and doing what felt right. The computer screen still showed the available first-class seat, a simple pixels and data representation of the growing tension at gate B23. What nobody noticed was the middle-aged man sitting 3 rows behind them, reading what appeared to be a newspaper. He had lowered it slightly, watching the scene unfold with increasing interest. His casual clothes gave no indication of his status, but his eyes held the sharp, evaluating look of someone used to being in command. The late afternoon sun streaming through the airport's massive windows cast long shadows across the terminal floor, as a simple request for an upgrade transformed into something that would soon test everyone's character in unexpected ways. General James Harrison lowered his newspaper just enough to observe the scene unfolding at the gate desk. His casual blue jeans and gray polo shirt revealed nothing of his status as either a retired Marine Corps general or his current position as an airline executive. He'd learned long ago that sometimes the best way to understand your company was to experience it like any other passenger. The day had started as a routine business trip. He'd deliberately booked a regular ticket, declining the executive travel service that usually handled his arrangements. Now, watching the interaction between the soldier, the businesswoman, and the gate agent, he was glad he had. From his carefully chosen seat, Harrison could hear every word of the exchange. 35 years of military service had taught him to read people, and right now he was reading volumes. The young staff surgeon's bearing, even with his injury, spoke of discipline and respect. Harrison noticed how the soldier kept adjusting his stance, clearly favoring his right leg, though trying not to show it. The general's mind drifted briefly to similar scenes from his own career. He'd seen countless young men and women like this staff sergeant, carrying both visible and invisible wounds from their service, yet maintaining their dignity and professionalism in the face of adversity. His hands, resting on the newspaper, tightened slightly as he listened to the businesswoman's continued complaints. A young boy, probably around 7, sat with his mother across from Harrison. The child watched the soldier with undisguised admiration, clutching the toy airplane. Harrison smiled, remembering how his own son used to look at uniforms with the same wonder. Now that son was a major in the Air Force, serving overseas. The gate agent's computer screen was visible from his angle, and Harrison could see her struggling to find a solution that would satisfy both passengers. He knew the airline's policies inside and out. After all, he'd helped shape many of them. There were procedures in place for situations like this, but they often got tangled in the web of customer loyalty programs and corporate politics. Harrison checked his phone, seeing a message from the airline CEO about tomorrow's board meeting. They were scheduled to discuss customer service initiatives, and he was witnessing firsthand exactly why those discussions were necessary. He typed a few quick notes, documenting what he was observing. The sun had begun to set outside the large terminal windows, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Airport staff moved efficiently around the gate area, preparing for the upcoming boarding process. A cleaning crew passed by, their carts squeaking quietly against the polished floor. All the while, the drama at the desk continued to unfold. Harrison noticed other passengers watching too. An elderly couple shook their heads disapprovingly at the businesswoman's behavior. A group of college students had stopped their conversation to watch, one of them recording discreetly with her phone. This would probably end up on social media by tomorrow, he thought. The general's decades of leadership experience made him want to step in immediately, but his analytical mind held him back. Sometimes you needed to let situations develop to truly understand where the system was breaking down. Still, he began to formulate a plan. His position as an airline executive gave him the authority to resolve this situation, but timing would be crucial. He watched as the staff sergeant started to back away from the counter, clearly willing to give up his request to avoid further conflict. That selfless gesture, so typical of service members, was the final detail Harrison needed to see. He folded his newspaper carefully, placing it on the empty seat beside him. The time for observation was ending. The time for action was approaching. As a flight attendant passed by, Harrison caught her eye and gestured subtly. He had a few questions about the flight crew today. Information he would need for what he was about to do. Sometimes the best solutions required all the right pieces to be in place. The tension at gate B-23 had reached a breaking point. Rebecca Thompson paced in front of the desk, her designer heels clicking against the floor like an impatient metronome. Her phone was now in her hand, perfectly manicured fingers scrolling through what appeared to be the airline's customer service policy. "Look," she said, holding up her phone screen to Sarah, the gate agent. "Right here, it clearly states that elite status members have priority for upgrades. I've earned this with my loyalty to the airline." Her voice carried across the gate area, drawing even more attention from nearby passengers. Jonathan Miller stood quietly to the side, his military training evident in his composed stance despite his discomfort. He shifted his weight again, trying to find a position that would ease the throbbing in his leg. A small bead of sweat rolled down his temple, not from the confrontation, but from the constant pain he was trying to hide. "Ma'am." Sarah tried again, her professional demeanor still intact but showing signs of strain. "Our policy also includes provisions for military personnel, especially in cases of medical necessity." "Medical necessity?" Rebecca interrupted, her voice rising an octave. "I don't see any obvious injury. Where's the documentation? For all we know, he could be exaggerating just to get preferential treatment." She gestured dismissively toward Jonathan's leg. A collective gasp rose from the onlookers. An older man in a business suit, sitting nearby, removed his reading glasses and stared at Rebecca in disbelief. A flight attendant preparing for boarding paused her duties, clipboard clutched tightly to her chest. "I apologize for causing any disruption," Jonathan said softly, his voice steady despite the accusation. "As I mentioned before, I'm happy to remain in my assigned seat." He reached for his backpack, wincing slightly as he bent down. Sarah's fingers hovered over her keyboard, her eyes darting between her computer screen and the growing crowd of spectators. The boarding time was approaching, and she needed to resolve this situation quickly. "Perhaps we could." "No, we can't just brush this aside," Rebecca persisted. "I'm tired of seeing this kind of preferential treatment everywhere. I work 14-hour days, travel constantly, and bring significant business to this airline. Why should my loyalty be overlooked?" A young girl tugged on her mother's sleeve, loudly whispering, "Mommy, why is that lady being mean to the soldier?" The mother quickly hushed her daughter, but the word hung in the air, causing Rebecca to falter momentarily. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the terminal windows, highlighting the faces of dozens of passengers who had stopped their pre-flight routines to watch the scene unfold. Some had their phones out, though they tried to be discreet about recording. Jonathan stood straighter, squaring his shoulders. "Ma'am, I respect your position as a loyal customer. I'm not trying to take advantage of anything. I simply made a request due to an injury sustained during my last tour. The gate agent can give the upgrade to whoever she feels is most appropriate according to airline policy." His quiet dignity in the face of Rebecca's accusations seemed to fuel her frustration even more. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. Using your service to make everyone else feel guilty. Well, I'm not falling for it. I know my rights as a customer." Sarah picked up her desk phone, likely calling for a supervisor, while casting apologetic glances at both parties. The boarding time was now just 15 minutes away, and the situation showed no signs of resolution. In his seat several rows back, General Harrison had seen and heard enough. He carefully placed his phone in his pocket and began to rise from his chair. Sometimes the right moment chooses itself, and this moment had definitely arrived. General James Harrison moved through the crowded gate area with the quiet confidence of someone used to commanding rooms much larger than this. His casual clothes might not have demanded attention, but his presence did. As he approached the desk, several passengers instinctively moved aside, sensing something significant was about to happen. Sarah looked up from her phone call, her expression shifting from stress to curiosity as Harrison gave her a gentle smile. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that needed no volume to be heard. "I believe I might be able to help with this situation." Rebecca turned, ready to defend her position to yet another interfering passenger, but something in Harrison's demeanor made her pause. Jonathan, still standing quietly to the side, noticed the change in the atmosphere even before Harrison reached into his pocket. "My name is James Harrison," he said, sliding his airline executive ID card across the counter to Sarah. Her eyes widened as she read it. He then produced a second card, his retired Marine Corps identification. "I believe I have some experience with both sides of this discussion." The gate area had grown so quiet that the distant sound of planes taxiing outside seemed unusually loud. Rebecca's phone, which she had been holding up like a shield, slowly lowered to her side. The screen still displayed the airline's upgrade policy, now seeming somehow less important than it had moments ago. "Staff Sergeant," Harrison turned to Jonathan, who immediately straightened despite his injury, recognizing the bearing of a superior officer. "Afghanistan or Iraq?" "Afghanistan, sir. Just completed my third tour." Jonathan's response was automatic, ingrained by years of service. Harrison nodded, his eyes noting the younger man's subtle wince as he shifted position. "4th Infantry Division?" he asked, gesturing to a detail on Jonathan's uniform that few civilians would recognize. "Yes, sir. Based out of Fort Carson." Sarah watched this exchange with growing understanding, her hand still resting on the phone she'd been using to call her supervisor. The pieces of what was about to happen were falling into place, and a small smile began to form at the corners of her mouth. "Miss Thompson," Harrison turned to Rebecca, whose composed business demeanor had begun to crack around the edges. I couldn't help but overhear your earlier comments about airline loyalty and earned status. He spoke with the measured tone of someone who had handled countless delicate situations. As Executive Vice President of Customer Relations for this airline, I want you to know that we deeply value our loyal customers. Rebecca's face had gone pale, her earlier righteous indignation draining away as she realized the full impact of who was standing before her. The phones recording the scene seemed to multiply as passengers sensed the moment's significance. However, Harrison continued, his voice gentle but firm, loyalty programs and military service represent two very different kinds of commitment to our country. He turned back to the gate agent. Sarah, would you please pull up the passenger manifest for me? The clicking of Sarah's keyboard seemed unusually loud in the hushed gate area. The young girl who had earlier questioned Rebecca's behavior was now watching with wide-eyed fascination, instinctively understanding that she was witnessing something important. Harrison studied the screen briefly, then nodded as if confirming something he already knew. The late afternoon sun streaming through the windows cast his shadow long across the terminal floor, a fitting metaphor for the influence he was about to exercise. The time had come to resolve this situation, and he intended to do it in a way that would teach a lesson about respect, service, and the true meaning of privilege. General Harrison leaned over the gate desk, his presence transforming the small space into what felt like a command center. Sarah's fingers moved swiftly across the keyboard as he quietly provided instructions. The surrounding passengers, still recording on their phones, had created an impromptu amphitheater around the scene. It appears, Harrison announced, straightening up with a warm smile, that we've had a fortunate system update. His words carried both authority and a hint of gentle amusement. 2 first-class seats have just become available on this flight. Rebecca Thompson's grip on her designer handbag tightened, her knuckles turning white. The confidence that had fueled her earlier demands had evaporated like morning dew under a hot sun. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again, suddenly unsure of her position in this dramatically shifted situation. Staff Sergeant Miller, Harrison turned to Jonathan, who was still maintaining his respectful stance despite visible discomfort. As a matter of airline policy regarding service-related injuries, we would be honored to offer you a first-class seat for your flight home. He paused, making eye contact with the young soldier. Consider it a small thank you for your service to our country. The gate area erupted in spontaneous applause, started by the elderly man who had been shaking his head earlier at Rebecca's behavior. The young girl who had questioned her mother about the scene bounced excitedly in her seat, clapping with unrestrained enthusiasm. Sarah began processing the seat change, her earlier stress replaced with genuine pleasure at being part of this moment. Her fingers flew across the keyboard with renewed purpose, a smile brightening her face as she printed out the new boarding pass. "Sir, I don't know what to say," Jonathan began, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for your—" "No thanks needed, son," Harrison interrupted gently. "I spent enough time in those combat boots to know what it means to serve." He turned to address the gate area at large, his voice carrying easily across the space. "Our airline has always been proud to support our military personnel. Sometimes we just need a reminder of what that really means." Rebecca shifted uncomfortably, her designer heels no longer clicking with authority on the terminal floor. Her earlier words about military privileges hung in the air like an unpleasant perfume. The phone in her hand, still displaying the airline's upgrade policy, now seemed to mock her previous arguments. "Miss Thompson," Harrison addressed her directly, his tone professional but firm. "I understand your commitment to our airline, and we value that loyalty. However, I believe this situation offers us all an opportunity to reflect on different kinds of service and sacrifice." He gestured to the gate agent. "Sarah, please ensure Ms. Thompson's economy comfort seat has extra legroom." The surrounding passengers exchanged knowing looks. A businessman in an expensive suit nodded approvingly, while a group of college students whispered among themselves, their phones still capturing every moment of the unfolding scene. Sarah printed the final boarding passes, her movements efficient and purposeful. The afternoon sun had begun its final descent, casting long shadows through the terminal windows and adding a touch of drama to the moment. The regular airport announcements continued overhead, a reminder that life moved on, even as small but significant dramas played out below. "Now," Harrison said, checking his watch with the precision of someone who had spent decades in military service, "I believe we should begin boarding this flight." He turned to Jonathan with a warm smile. "Staff Sergeant, would you allow me to assist you with your bag?" The tension that had filled the gate area just moments ago had transformed into something else entirely, a shared moment of witnessing justice served with grace and dignity. As Sarah reached for the microphone to announce the beginning of boarding, the passengers of Flight 2478 knew they had just witnessed something they wouldn't soon forget. The boarding process began with a sense of ceremony that wasn't typical for a domestic flight. General Harrison personally escorted Staff Sergeant Miller down the jet bridge, carrying the young soldier's backpack despite Jonathan's polite protests. The other first-class passengers, already aware of what had transpired at the gate, nodded respectfully as they passed. Rebecca Thompson found herself at the back of the Group 2 boarding line, a position unfamiliar to someone of her elite status. Her phone had disappeared into her handbag, the airline's upgrade policy no longer relevant to her situation. Several passengers who had witnessed her earlier behavior pointedly avoided making eye contact. Inside the aircraft, a flight attendant named Michael was already preparing the first-class cabin. His eyes widened with recognition when he saw General Harrison, not because of the casual clothes he wore, but because Michael had served under him years ago in the Marines. The two men exchanged knowing looks as Harrison helped Jonathan settle into his seat. "Staff Sergeant Miller," Harrison said, placing the backpack carefully in the overhead compartment, "I believe you'll find this seat has everything the doctor ordered." He gestured to the spacious legroom and adjustable footrest that would allow Jonathan to elevate his injured leg during the flight. The other passengers filed past, many smiling at Jonathan or offering quiet words of thanks for his service. The young girl from the gate area waved enthusiastically as she passed with her mother, her earlier question about kindness answered by watching justice unfold. Rebecca made her way down the aisle, her designer suit slightly less crisp than it had been an hour ago. As she passed the first-class cabin, she caught a glimpse of Jonathan settling into his seat, General Harrison ensuring he was comfortable. The sight made her cheeks flush with embarrassment. "Sir," Jonathan said quietly as Harrison prepared to head to his own seat, "I don't know how to thank you for this. Not just the seat upgrade, but for—" He paused, searching for the right words. "For reminding people that service comes in many forms." Harrison finished with a gentle smile. "Sometimes we all need a reminder of what really matters, Staff Sergeant. Now tell me about that tour in Afghanistan. I spent some time there myself, back in 05. As the remaining passengers boarded, the two men fell into easy conversation. Harrison shared stories from his own military career, while Jonathan spoke about his unit and their missions. Their discussion carried the comfortable rhythm of soldiers who, despite their difference in rank and age, shared a common bond of service. Michael, the flight attendant, brought them both bottles of water before takeoff, adding his own quiet thanks to Jonathan for his service. The gesture was small but genuine, free from the drama that had surrounded the gate area confrontation. From her economy comfort seat, Rebecca could hear occasional laughter from the first-class cabin. Each chuckle seemed to underscore the lesson she had learned about privilege, respect, and the true meaning of status. Her laptop remained closed in her bag. For the first time in countless flights, work emails seemed less important than reflection. As the plane began its taxi to the runway, the setting sun painted the cabin in soft golden light. Jonathan finally allowed himself to fully relax, the pain in his leg easing as he elevated it properly for the first time since leaving Afghanistan. His thoughts drifted to his family waiting in Augusta, unaware that their son was returning home with a story that went far beyond his military service. General Harrison glanced around the cabin with satisfaction. In his decades of service, both military and corporate, he had learned that sometimes the most powerful messages were delivered not through words, but through actions. Today's lesson in humanity would ripple far beyond Flight 2478, thanks to dozens of passengers with phones and social media accounts. By the time Flight 2478 landed in Augusta, the video of the gate incident had already gone viral. Passengers' phones lit up with notifications as they taxied to the gate, social media buzzing with shares and comments about the encounter between the businesswoman, the soldier, and the undercover airline executive. Jonathan's mother, waiting anxiously at Augusta Regional Airport, had no idea that her son was about to walk off the plane as a social media sensation. She stood near the arrival gate, holding a small welcome home sign, completely unaware that the past few hours had transformed her son's return into something extraordinary. As passengers began deplaning, Rebecca Thompson hurried through the terminal, her earlier confidence replaced by thoughtful humility. The flight had given her hours to reflect on her behavior, and something had shifted in her understanding of privilege and respect. She paused at a coffee shop, pulled out her laptop, and began typing what would become a public apology letter. General Harrison and Jonathan were among the last to leave the aircraft. The general had insisted on helping with Jonathan's backpack again, their conversation having continued throughout the flight about shared experiences in Afghanistan. As they walked through the jet bridge, Harrison handed Jonathan his business card. "If you ever need anything, son," Harrison said warmly, "don't hesitate to call. And I mean anything." He paused, then added with a knowing smile, "Though I suspect your flying experiences might be a bit more comfortable from now on." The airline's corporate offices were already responding to the viral video. By midnight, they would announce a new military upgrade policy, specifically addressing service members with medical needs. Sarah, the gate agent, would receive a commendation for her professional handling of the situation, and her experience would become part of the airline's customer service training program. Jonathan's reunion with his mother was everything he had hoped for. As she rushed forward to embrace him, tears streaming down her face, he held her tightly, grateful that his injured leg had led to such an unexpected turn of events. The small crowd of passengers who recognized him from the flight smiled at the touching scene, a few discreetly wiping away tears of their own. The next morning, Rebecca's public apology appeared on several social media platforms. "Yesterday, I learned a powerful lesson about privilege, service, and humanity," she wrote. "My behavior at Atlanta International Airport was inexcusable, and I want to publicly apologize to Staff Sergeant Miller and to all military service members who sacrifice so much for our country." Her post included a significant donation to a veterans medical support organization, along with a pledge to volunteer at her local VA hospital. The sincerity of her words and actions resonated with many, turning what could have been a purely negative viral moment into a story of learning and redemption. The airline's new military upgrade policy was implemented within a week, now clearly prioritizing service members with medical needs. Gate agents across the country received updated training, and a special service desk was established specifically for military personnel requiring assistance with travel arrangements. 1 month later, Jonathan received an unexpected package at his home. Inside was a first-class ticket for his sister to visit him during her college break, courtesy of General Harrison. The accompanying note read simply, "Taking care of our military families is everyone's responsibility. Safe travels." The young girl who had witnessed everything at the airport that day went on to write an award-winning school essay about respect and kindness, inspired by what she had seen. Her teacher shared it at a school assembly, spreading the lesson even further. As for General Harrison, he continued his habit of occasionally traveling incognito on his airline's flights, believing that the best way to understand your customers was to sit among them. But he would always remember Flight 2478 as the day when a simple upgrade request turned into a lesson in humanity that touched thousands of lives.